Have you ever wondered what the founding fathers were fighting for as a whole against the British Empire and how they managed to stay united? When we witness the chaos that is currently surrounding us, we can't help but wonder if we're going to stay united as a free country for long. Divide into factions to the point that we are weak to foreign invasions, or if our government is going to mutate into a form of tyranny. This certainly was the case with the 13 colonies back in 1776, or should I say 1775. After undergoing different kinds of imposing taxes on property, quartering of British soldiers amongst the colonies, as well as numerous kinds of abuses that our public school won't cover for some odd reason, the American colonies then decided that they had enough. It was bad enough they were willing to coordinate to this kind of level regarding Lexington and Concord.
The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. As Revere was settling into his Boston home in the late 1770s, he became active politically. He responded to the new laws about tea imports that bypassed Boston's merchants by attending secret meetings with the inner circle who planned the Boston Tea Party. Revere joined other activists and dumped tea from the British East India Company on December 16, 1773, in the Boston harbor. His activism extended beyond the confines of Boston when Revere began work as a courier and rode from Boston to New York on horse to spread information about the colonies. When his associates learned the British were moving troops out of Boston and planned to arrest revolutionary leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock in Lexington, Massachusetts, Revere was tasked with tipping them off to help avoid arrest. He first used his signal system and had 2 lanterns placed on the Old North Church steeple in Boston to alert those on the harbor that the troops had left Boston and were crossing the Charles River. Then, at about 10 p.m., on April 18, 1775, Revere set out in the dark from his North Boston home by horse with 2 other riders to reach Adams and Hancock. The riders met the pair in Lexington and enabled the revolutionaries to avoid arrest. Revere's next stop that late night was Concord, Massachusetts, a hotbed of the resistance and the suspected location of the British troops' second attack. But Revere was captured by the British en route and never reached Concord. He was soon released, but Revere had already helped give the colonial militia a key advantage by alerting them to the impending attack by the British. The battles of Lexington and Concord would spark the Revolutionary War. The shot heard round the world, the battles of Lexington and Concord. The clash began on April 19, 1775, when about 700 British soldiers were given what they thought were secret orders to destroy colonial military supplies in Concord, Massachusetts. Fortunately, thanks to a rather elaborate colonial intelligence network led by the Sons of Liberty, the Patriots were aware that their supplies were at risk and were able to move them to different locations long before the British began to move. Also, thanks to the daring rides of a few brave men, the colonial militia knew that an engagement with the British was imminent. The first shots were fired just after dawn in Lexington, Massachusetts, the morning of the 19th, the quote, shot heard round the world. The colonial militia, a band of 500 men, were outnumbered and initially forced to retreat. The British Army was able to press forward to Concord, where they searched for the supplies, only to come up empty-handed. While the British were searching, the American militia was able to reform, and they met the enemy at the North Bridge in Concord, and they were successful this time in driving the British back. As more American reinforcements arrived, they forced the British Army south to Boston. and the militias blockaded the narrow land accesses to Charlestown and Boston, starting the Siege of Boston. The American War for Independence was now in full swing.
When we study this revolution, it didn't just limit the colonist to only defending his or her own home from any threat, even from the state. It entailed a deep involvement with one's own neighbors, community, town, and society as a whole. This connection was so deep that not only were the militia able to form with the size of roughly a battalion against the British, they coordinated with spies and informants on British troop movements to Lexington and Concord. Once the Patriots heard of the imminent British movement to seize firearms, military equipment belonging to the colonies, and military rations, they immediately relocated the supplies from Lexington to another location. The militia later then reformed at Concord to drive out the British. In layman's terms, all this military activity was done by average, ordinary American citizens, such as you and I. It wasn't just every man and woman for themselves. There was a coordinated effort by average citizens in a militaristic manner. But what would keep them united and ensure their success? Different states held their preferences and established their colonies differently. While some founding fathers owned slaves, others were abolitionists and wanted to be rid of slavery entirely. Others were abolitionists and wanted to get rid of slavery in a gradual manner to avoid division and self-destruction. Some colonists were also in disagreement whether if war against the British Empire was necessary. So, if their views on slavery and other property goods were in contrast, as well as other political views, what was the one unifying factor? What kept them all together? In order for us to understand this, we need to first read the introduction to the Declaration of Independence, which was written over roughly a year after the Lexington and Concord battle. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth, to separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impelled them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Now, for some who are of middle to high school level, here is what Thomas Jefferson is stating here. There is going to come a time when the people of a nation will have to separate themselves from not just their ruler, but to also separate themselves from the political system as a whole. When this time does come, it is our moral obligated duty to explain to this government why we the people are separating. We the people, as a whole, believe that everyone has the right to live in peace with their neighbors and the law, to do as we please, and to live our lives to the fullest. We the people believe in this without violating these respective rights of other men and women. In order for us to successfully do so, we willfully set in place governors who are willing, in turn, to protect these rights not just from chaos, but also from tyranny. They do so by setting rules in place in order for us to follow for the security of our God-given rights. When the elected officials who promise to protect our rights end up violating those rights, whether it be for total control or to promote privileges of certain people at the expense of violating another person's rights, set in place rules that violate those rights, or fail to protect our rights, we the people are no longer required to follow the rules that they have set in place. We the people are now free from our contract with the governor or ruler and now seek to replace him. With that being said, it is vital to understand when to separate from government. It is far better in most cases to hold in its place the government or the system that has long been around for centuries, than to completely dismantle it overnight or within the same year. If a violation of a God-given right comes up and it can be dealt with through the current establishment of government, there is absolutely no need to tear it down. However, if the current system is incapable of rectifying one violation of a right out of a long record of violations, it is not just our right to separate from this power. It is our moral obligated duty to our fellow neighbors and countrymen to separate the power that violates our neighbors' rights and set up a new power that will guard their rights as mentioned above. So, what kept the colonies united against the British was a mutual interest in self-preservation of rights granted to them. Who or what grant them these rights, though? Thomas Jefferson tells us, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So, according to Thomas Jefferson and all of the signers of this document from all 13 colonies, it is already made known to every man on earth that we are provided these rights by this entity, a creator. What could Thomas Jefferson mean when he says creator? Could it be just any particular deity that just decided to create the earth and mankind and then just decide to leave us to ourselves? This belief is very common amongst other deists. I'm willing to bet, however, that's not what he meant. In an exchange of letters between him and John Adams, after their toxic political lives towards each other, Thomas Jefferson responds to Adams' prayers and rejoicing regarding the healing of Jefferson's hand. Jefferson fractured his hand in a horse riding accident, and then later again at France, hopping over a fence to impress the ladies around this time frame, even though he was well in his 80s. In rejoicing over Jefferson's recovery, Adams sarcastically says for him to continue in life and health until he becomes a Calvinist. Adams was strongly opposed to the Calvinist theology. In response to this, Jefferson writes,
From Thomas Jefferson to John Adams. Dear Sir, the wishes expressed in your last favor that I may continue in life and health until I become a Calvinist, at least in his exclamation of Mon Dieu jusqu'à quand, would make me immortal. I can never join Calvin in addressing his God. He was indeed an atheist, which I can never be. Or rather, his religion was demonism. If ever man worshipped a false god, he did. The being described in his 5 points is not the God whom you and I acknowledge and adore, the creator and benevolent governor of the world, but a demon of malignant spirit. It would be more pardonable to believe in no God at all than to blaspheme him by the atrocious attributes of Calvin. Indeed, I think that every Christian sect gives a great handle to atheism by their general dogma that without revelation there would not be sufficient proof of the being of a God. Now, 1/6 of mankind only are supposed to be Christians. The other 5/6 then, who do not believe in the Jewish and Christian revelation, are without a knowledge of the existence of a God. This gives completely a gained cause to the disciples of Oculus Timaeus Spinoza, Diderot, and d'Holbach. The argument which they rest on as triumphant and unanswerable is that in every hypothesis of cosmogony you must admit an eternal pre-existence of something, and according to the rule of sound philosophy, you are never to employ 2 principles to solve a difficulty when one will suffice. They say, then, that it is more simple to believe at once in the eternal pre-existence of the world, as it is now going on, and may forever go on, by the principle of reproduction which we see and witness, than to believe in the eternal pre-existence of an ulterior cause, or creator of the world, a being whom we see not and know not, of whose form, substance, and mode or place of existence, or of action, no sense informs us. No power of the mind enables us to delineate or comprehend. On the contrary, I hold, without appeal to revelation, that when we take a view of the universe in its parts, general or particular, it is impossible for the human mind not to perceive and feel a conviction of design, consummate skill, and indefinite power in every atom of its composition. The movements of the heavenly bodies, so exactly held in their course by the balance of centrifugal and centripetal forces, the structure of our earth itself, with its distribution of lands, waters, and atmosphere, animal and vegetable bodies, examined in all their minutest particles, insects mere atoms of life, yet as perfectly organized as man or mammoth, the mineral substances, their generation and uses, it is impossible, I say, for the human mind not to believe that there is not in all this design, cause, and effect, up to an ultimate cause, a fabricator of all things from matter and motion, their preserver and regulator, while permitted to exist in their present forms, and their regenerator into new and other forms. We see, too, evident proofs of the necessity of a superintending power to maintain the universe in its course and order. Stars well known have disappeared, new ones have come into view. Comets, in their incalculable courses, may run foul of suns and planets and require renovation under other laws. Certain races of animals are become certain races of animals are become extinct, and were there no restoring power, all existences might extinguish successively, one by one, until all should be reduced to a shapeless chaos. So irresistible are these evidences of an intelligent and powerful agent that of the infinite numbers of men who have existed through all time, they have believed in the proportion of 1,000,000 at least to unit in the hypothesis of an eternal pre-existence of a creator, rather than in that of a self-existent universe. Surely this unanimous sentiment renders this more probable than that of the few in the other hypothesis. Some early Christians, indeed, have believed in the co-eternal pre-existence of both the Creator and the world, without changing their relation of cause and effect. That this was the opinion of St. Thomas, we are informed by Cardinal Toledo in these words. Oh gosh, I'm not even going to try to pronounce all of that.
I'm going to stop here for just a brief minute. Take a notice at how he capitalizes creator here when mentioning the benevolent governor of the world. In the exact same way he capitalized creator in the Declaration of Independence. Now, take a look at how this creator is lowercased. This is when Jefferson is talking about any creator. Shortly thereafter, the capitalized creator pops up. What does this mean? This means that Jefferson didn't just mean any particular deity when penning down the term creator the way he did in the Declaration of Independence regarding rights given to mankind. He was specific.
Of the nature of this being, we know nothing. Jesus tells us that God is a spirit. John 24. But without defining what a spirit is, down to the 3rd century, we know that it was still deemed material, but of a lighter, subtler matter than our gross bodies. So says Orion. If God, more words. These are the words of Hewitt in his commentary on Orion. Orion himself says, oh God, more words. So also Tertullian, and more words. Tertullian, these two fathers were of the 3rd century. Calvin's character of this supreme being seems chiefly copied from that of the Jews. But the reformation of these blasphemous attributes and substitution of those more worthy, pure, and sublime seems to have been the chief object of Jesus in his discourses to the Jews, and his doctrine of the cosmology of the world is very clearly laid down in the 3 first verses of the first. And his doctrine of the cosmology of the world is very clearly laid down in the 3 first verses of the 1st chapter of John in these words. That's Greek, I think. Which truly translated means, in the beginning God existed, and reason, or mind, was with God, and that mind was God. This was in the beginning with God. All things were created by it, and without it was made not one thing which was made. Yet this text so plainly declaring the doctrine of Jesus that the world was created by the supreme intelligent being has been perverted by modern Christians to build up a second person of their tritheism by a mistranslation of the word, that Greek word right there. One of its legitimate meanings, indeed, is a word, but in that sense it makes an unmeaning jargon, while the other meaning, reason, equally legitimate, explains rationality. While the other meaning, reason, equally legitimate, explains rationally the eternal pre-existence of God and his creation of the world. Knowing how incomprehensible it was that a word, the mere action or articulation of the voice and organs of speech, could create a world, they undertake to make of this articulation a second pre-existing being and ascribe to him and not to God the creation of the universe. The atheist here plums himself on the uselessness of such a God, and the simpler hypothesis of a self-existent universe. The truth is that the greatest enemies to the doctrines of Jesus are those calling themselves the expositors of them, who have perverted them for the structure of a system of fancy absolutely incomprehensible and without any foundation in his genuine words. And the day will come when the mystical generation of Jesus, by the Supreme Being as his father in the womb of a virgin, will be classed with the fable of the generation of Minerva in the brain of Jupiter. But we may hope that the dawn of reason and freedom of thought in these United States will do away all this artificial scaffolding and restore to us the primitive and genuine doctrines of this, the most venerated reformer of human errors. So much for your quotation of Calvin's Mon Dieu jusqu'à quand, in which, when addressed to the God of Jesus and our God, I join you cordially and await his time, and will with more readiness than reluctance. May we meet there again in Congress with our ancient colleagues, and receive with them the seal of approbation. Well done, good and faithful servants.
The seal of approbation, well done, good and faithful servants, is derived from a parable told by Jesus himself. This parable, along with another, was provided to his disciples after providing them hints and tells regarding the end times. In both of these parables, Jesus describes the likeness of the kingdom of heaven at that time. The first parable entailed keeping watch through current events in looking for the return of Christ. The second had to do with trusted works before death or the return of Christ. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags bought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. According to the parable, Thomas Jefferson could settle with just solely the relationship with Christ, but something else comes with that relationship. Along with growing that relationship is serving God as well as furthering his kingdom. Like Christ, Jefferson, as well as other believers in the cross, have the opportunity to establish a healthy rule over the earth. This is echoed by Paul the Apostle in Galatians chapter 3, verses 28 through 29. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So when Jefferson says all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, it wouldn't make sense to say that he means anyone's God in general. If that were the case, he wouldn't have slandered Calvin in the way that he did. Since the word Creator is mentioned in relation to the God of the Bible, we can conclude that all of our rights as Americans come strictly from the Bible. We get our sense of right and wrong from the Bible, as well as the love for our fellow countrymen or the neighbors within our communities. This was made evident in Jesus' teaching when one of the teachers of the law decided to test him by asking which commandment in the Bible was the greatest. Here's what Jesus' response was. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. For all the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. In Mark chapter 12, verses 29 through 30, we find this. The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. What was interesting was the response of the teacher of the law. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You are right in saying that God is one, and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, You are not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions. At the end of the teacher's response to Jesus, he stated that these 2 commandments were more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. This was in relation to the incident in Israel's history when King Saul would conduct a sacrifice out of impatience, as well as sacrificing a warring tribe's livestock against the obedience of God. Because King Saul had not loved the Lord as mentioned above, he ended up disregarding God's commands and conducted duties of other people that were supposed to fulfill those duties. As a consequence, not only was the throne taken from him and given to David, he, along with his son Jonathan, were killed in battle. This has happened to numerous kings and rulers throughout biblical history. The moment they forsake the respect for what is right and wrong, along with their respect for their fellow countrymen, a toppling of their rule is sure to follow. I could list an insane amount of examples, but I think you get my point. The same goes for the countrymen as well. If they too forsake the respect for what is right and wrong, along with not only the respect for their fellow countrymen, but also their duly elected leaders, they may as well kiss their way of living goodbye. This was evident in Israel's deportation to Babylonian captivity, as mentioned by the prophet Jeremiah. So, where did the love for our inalienable rights go, as well as the love for our fellow countrymen? Later, we see that people no longer listen to one another, attack another person because of their skin color, destroy another person's property, show blatant disrespect towards duly elected officials, fire employees just because of certain ideological perspectives, no matter how innocent, and the suppression of free speech, just to name a few. Anyone remember what happened in 1962? A small group of organizations decided to challenge voluntary prayer in school, claiming it violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. In response, the Supreme Court ruled 6-1 in favor of Stephen Engel, the petitioner.
The state cannot hold prayers in public schools even if participation is not required and the prayer is not tied to a particular religion. In an opinion authored by Hugo L. Black, the court held that respondents' decision to use its school system to facilitate recitation of the official prayer violated the Establishment Clause. Specifically, the policy breached the constitutional wall of separation between church and state. The court ruled that the constitutional prohibition of laws establishing religion meant that government had no business drafting formal prayers for any segment of its population to repeat in a government-sponsored religious program. The court held that respondents' provision of the contested daily prayer was inconsistent with the Establishment Clause. Justice Douglas concurred in the judgment on the ground that the state's financing a religious exercise violated the First Amendment. Justice Stewart dissented, arguing that no official religion was established by permitting those who want to say a prayer to say it.
The lack of prayer and Bible in schools thus severs a connection between the child and the Creator that endows human beings with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When that connection severs, how can you justify the rights that you hold other than just saying, "Because I said so"? You say you have the right to freedom of speech, but your freedom of speech infringes on my right to be safe from hate speech. We could say that teaching our children what rights we hold as Americans, but even that ends up proving difficult. 10 years later, when the kids in elementary school during Engel v. Vitale grew up to become teenagers and college students, Roe v. Wade had occurred and was ruled 7-2 in favor for Jane Roe, stating that in the first trimester of pregnancy, the state may not regulate the abortion decision. Only the pregnant woman and her attending physician can make that decision. In the second trimester, the state may impose regulations on abortion that are reasonably related to material health. In the third trimester, once the fetus reaches the point of viability, a state may regulate abortions or prohibit them entirely, so long as the laws contain exceptions for cases when abortion is necessary to save the life or health of the mother. So, according to Roe v. Wade, a state can write laws to prohibit late-term abortions, provided there are exceptions made for protecting the mother's health. There is a problem with the way the majority opinion is worded. If the state can write laws to prevent abortion with the listed exceptions for the life and health of the mother, can a state write laws to permit the mother's right to choose to abort their child in the third trimester, provided there are exceptions made for protecting the baby's health? In other words, why does it have to be determined by the state whether or not that a child which has reached the point of viability has a right to live?
Or will you do research programs on babies where we tell poor women that, your baby died right when they were born, but really we'll keep the baby alive and sometimes kill them, sometimes harvest them, sometimes do experiments on them. So that's why a lot of nurses have noticed now that the babies disappear at birth. They tell them, your baby died. That's why the governor said, who's actually an organ harvesting doctor, he goes, we keep the babies alive after they're born and have a discussion. They are getting caught now because we've decompartmentalized.
Wait a minute. I'm confused what you're saying.
Let's see how it just never ends.
Yeah. What are you saying about babies? Like, what are they doing with babies?
You saw the governor of Virginia say, we keep babies alive after they're born and kill them, right?
Well, I didn't see that.
We keep them comfortable.
But I am very, very concerned with late-term abortions.
Well, this is post-birth, Joe. So understand,
post-birth.
How much money do you think they get for a 7.5-pound baby they can keep alive for 2 weeks? And mama doesn't know.
So
if they can register the organs and get bidders,
but wait a minute,
then they can make $500,000.
Wait a minute, you're saying that the
baby they kill on the spot only gets $50,000.
But you were saying that they take the baby from the mother and the mother doesn't know that the baby's alive?
Yeah, you know how they engineer tomatoes to last on the shelf?
Yes.
To make matters even worse, if I have to write a law that specifically states that I can't murder my child, what other laws do I have to write in such a specific manner that even without writing them would be illegal or morally wrong otherwise?
Okay. Committee hearing yesterday when Fairfax County Delegate Kathy Tran made her case for lifting restrictions on third trimester abortions as well as other restrictions now in place. And she was pressed by a Republican delegate about whether her bill would permit an abortion even as a woman is essentially dilating, ready to give birth. And she answered that it would permit an abortion at that stage of labor. Do you support her measure and explain her answer?
Yeah, and I wasn't there, Julie, and I certainly can't speak for Delegate Tran, but I would tell you, first thing I would say is this is why decisions such as this should be made by providers, physicians, and the mothers and fathers that are involved.
Jamie, I didn't mean to interrupt. Start over. Back it up 10 seconds. Notice he's usurping law. Okay. And their whole plan is bioethics. I'll explain in a minute.
But let's let him talk. It's only 2 minutes.
Mothers and fathers that are involved. There are, when we talk about third trimester abortions, these are done with the consent of obviously the mother, with the consent of the physicians, more than one physician, by the way. And it's done in cases where there may be severe deformities, there may be a fetus that's non-viable. So in this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. So I think this was really blown out of proportion. But again, we want the government not to be involved in these types of decisions. We want the decision to be made by the mothers and their providers. And this is why, Julie, that legislators, most of whom are men, by the way, shouldn't be telling a woman what she should and shouldn't be doing with her body.
And do you think multiple physicians should have to weigh in, as is currently required? She's trying to lift that requirement.
Well, I think it's always good to get a second opinion and for at least 2 providers to be involved in that decision, because these decisions shouldn't be taken lightly. And so, I would certainly support more than one provider.
All right, let's go back to the phone.
Wow, that's a weird thing that she just kind of let him say.
Would you like to the rest of the story? Because Jamie pulled it up.
But hold on a second. What's weird is that they were talking about resuscitating the baby, that they would keep the baby alive, then a decision would be made. Isn't that's like euthanasia? Like you can't
You
even do
just
that
said
to your
it.
Grammy.
That's why you're so smart, John. I'm not kissing your ass.
But you can't do that to your Grammy, right? Your Grammy's like 80 years old. You can't just kill her.
Well,
You
remember
can't just say she's
Newsweek? Remember the
suffering.
Newsweek cover, the case for killing Granny? They say that, so let me explain. Now you've got it. Did you hear that, legalese? Turns out, when I saw that clip a month ago, because they had them doing debate about the bill,
Right.
and they said, yeah, we'll kill babies after they're born. And they're debating, well, how far along? Well, whatever the doctors say. But it's jurisprudence. There's law. You can't do that. So this is saying, oh, the government not involved. This is the medical system usurping. If they can kill a baby after it's born, because sometimes they deformed. You know, see, sometimes they deformed. Here's the key. Notice he said, we resuscitate. They don't consider you alive till the bioethics board says that you're a viable human. And under the bioethics in Europe and under the UN now, which is all Nazi. By the way, the EU was set up by the Nazis. Volkswagen, I'm not against Volkswagen itself, but that was literally drawn, the first Volkswagen by Hitler. Audi, the Olympic symbol. I mean, Hitler was a really bad dude, but he literally, so much of our world's governed by him. NASA, everything. They had a system where they first killed babies they thought were deformed. That was 1934. And the final solution happened like 6-7 years later. And so he's saying, because they've got a big problem. They've got undercover videos. They're keeping babies alive. You want to pull those up? I'm not BSing. There's dozens. So they've got to start getting it going now with governor, physicians, and people to go, because the nurses are freaking out. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, we're keeping babies alive, and they get put in a van and drive away. What's going on? They're like, well, we didn't keep them comfortable. So the baby's worth $500,000.
Who's paying that?
In the chain of delivery, just on time delivery. I mean, each organ's worth a lot of money. And so, but if you kill them right on the spot, they're like, why are we wasting this 7 pounds of meat? So see, if they can keep them alive, and now they've built these new wings. They've built new wings. No, I can pull up. They have wings where they go, oh, we consider the baby dead. The mother decided it didn't live. If she decides we resuscitate and it lives, but it didn't resuscitate. Its flesh, it's a legalese. It's passed into a special ward with doctors that make a few million a year. And the little flesh ball is kept alive and comfortable until all the orders come in, the planes land, and they take the organs, then they take the blood, and they take the skin, Joe. You see how it works? Now
Dude,
you know
you're freaking
why.
me out with this voice.
No, but see, it's a Southern loving voice.
Oh.
You see, my dad knew organ harvesters in Dallas, and he said, don't sign your organ donor card. They've got corrupt hospitals where if you're totally viable, they take your organs.
Oh, Jesus
And
Christ.
then I said, Dad, you're crazy, but I didn't sign the organ donor card. And then my dad owned a hospital, too, in Dallas. Then when I was a decade later at my grandparents' house before my grandpa died, watching 60 Minutes, and it was Dallas, Texas, and Chicago caught killing people that were viable to take their organs. Tonight, the 60 Minutes expose. And it was the freaking hospital my dad told me about.
Jesus Christ.
So, Joe, that's what I'm telling you is, were you at the kitchen table when you were 8 hearing about cyborgs? See, that's why I know about this. My dad never got fully into it. He decided to get out of it. And he decided to get out of it.
You're legitimately freaking me the fuck out.
Joe, I will let you.
You know, the problem is some of it makes sense because people figure out a way to rationalize a lot of things. And if you see a guy who's mangled in a car accident, but he's still alive, and you know you could sell the
his back's
organs.
broken. He could save 5 lives.
Yeah.
Make him comfortable.
Yeah. I mean,
Joe.
but the thing is, how many people would have to be involved for that to be real?
You know, you can love Alex Jones or hate him, but he's actually been trending since the beginning of 2019, when these point-of-birth abortion laws were being passed. Some of these comments down below are actually hilarious, but sobering at the same time, which is what makes it hilarious.
Plot twist. Alex Jones is actually right about everything, and he's just the most frustrated person on the planet. Yes, ha 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 ha. LOL, pretty much. That's probably pretty close to the truth. Right? He is the most frustrated person on the planet. Very concise, LOL. I actually think I agree. It's not even a twist, it's just true. He was right about Hollywood, but seriously though, he's right 50% of the time and he is frustrated that nobody listens to him. Jesus, we can't stop watching. Every time he tells Jamie to Google something and it comes up legit, I get chills. People who think Alex Jones is talking out of his ass are a bunch of sheep brainwashed by false prophets. Much of what he says is mostly truth if you remove the schizophrenic veneer.
Now, I'm willing to go further, oh, so much further, than Alex Jones when he says that the babies are being kept alive in order to harvest their organs. Why not just keep the babies alive, period? Have them grow up in a laboratory with no name, no identity, no birth certificate, just a number and a body. Can you imagine the kinds of people involved in organized criminal enterprises that can profit off of that? Jeffrey Epstein certainly can. Planned Parenthood has been around for quite some time now, at least since the 1970s. They've had up to 50 years to get entangled into some really weird shenanigans. Makes me wonder what else they, along with some politicians, celebrities, experts, and rich philanthropists, have been able to successfully conceal from the public eye. Why are celebrities so enticed to defend abortion even after Ricky Gervais tells them to keep their political opinion to themselves and bringing to light that Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself?
Spoiler alert, season 2 is on the way, so in the end, he obviously didn't kill himself. Just like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care. You like to make your own way here in your own plane, didn't you? Right, but seriously, most films... It's the last time, who cares? Oh. Apple roared into the TV game with a morning show. A superb drama, yeah. A superb drama about the importance of dignity and doing the right thing, made by a company that runs sweatshops in China. So, well, you say you're woke, but the companies you work for, I mean, unbelievable. Apple, Amazon, Disney. If ISIS started a streaming service, you'd call your agent, wouldn't you? So, if you do win an award tonight, don't use it as a platform to make a political speech, right? You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg. So, if you win, right, come up, accept your little award, thank your agent and your God, and... So...
When you put this in someone's hands, you're acknowledging the choices that they make as an actor, moment by moment, scene by scene, day by day, but you're also acknowledging the choices they make as a person. I'm grateful for the acknowledgement of the choices I've made, and I'm also grateful to have lived at a moment in our society where choice exists, because as women and as girls, things can happen to our bodies that are not our choice. I tried my very best to live a life of my own making, and not just a series of events that happened to me, but one that I could stand back and look at and recognize my handwriting all over, sometimes messy and scrawling, sometimes careful and precise, but one that I had carved with my own hand, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without employing a woman's right to choose. 18 to 118, when it is time to vote, please do so in your own self-interest. It's what men have been doing for years.
Look at this idiot crying.
Why does almost everyone that has information on the Clintons suddenly disappear or end up dead?
For 3 years, I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. we were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. And I had it all 3 years ago. So do I think he was killed? 100%. Yes, I do. Because he made his whole living blackmailing people. Yeah. There were a lot of men in those planes, a lot of men who visited that island, a lot of powerful men who came into that apartment. I mean, when I heard he was found dead, Mr. Giselle, I knew immediately. And they made it seem as though he made that suicide attempt 2 weeks earlier, but his lawyers claimed that he was roughed up by his cellmate around the neck. That was all like to plant the seed, and then that's why I really believe it. Like, really believe it. He's got to have left evidence, like, in the unexplained. Well, Ghislaine Maxwell, who I had all sorts of stuff on her too. I love it. I'm like, it's so funny to hear everyone say her name now, because I'm like, oh my God, like, I had all this, and everyone was like, who's that? Who cares? I kept getting that. Who cares? She knows everything. She should be careful. Well, she was his, like, she went out and recruited all of these girls. Stand by. She should watch her back. Because if she goes, I mean, I'd have like security guards all around me.
Why does Dr. Fauci all of a sudden seem to not have a clue what he's talking about, not just on the coronavirus, that I can understand since it is a new event to occur in our life, but on the basic knowledge of medicine?
Debate rages after Dr. Anthony Fauci, a key member of the president's White House coronavirus task force, said on CNN this morning that a new policy may be coming. Right now, the CDC is saying masks should only be worn if you're sick or you're taking care of someone who is.
Dr. Fauci, I want to ask you specifically about masks. Now, I'm in South Carolina right now, and there's not a whole lot of people wearing masks. So I want to ask you specifically, can you define for people what the role of masks is? And why were we told to wait? Why were we told later in the spring to wear them when we initially were told not to?
Now, getting back to your first question, which was, what about a month or so, or 2 or 3 ago, when people were saying, you don't really need to wear a mask? Well, the reason for that is that we were concerned, the public health community, and many people were saying this, were concerned that it was at a time when personal protective equipment, including the N95 masks and the surgical masks, were in very short supply. And we wanted to make sure that the people, namely the healthcare workers, who were brave enough to put themselves in harm's way to take care of people who were infected with the coronavirus and the danger of them getting infected, we did not want them to be without the equipment that they needed.
Just when you think our media and scientific establishment can't lose any more credibility on coronavirus, they come around and surprise you. Dr. Fauci, remember Dr. Fauci, the exalted one, peace be upon him? Dr. Fauci appeared on CNN yesterday to announce some excellent news. They think they've got a vaccine, but there was a caveat: the vaccine might not be all that effective.
I doubt seriously that any vaccine will ever be 100% protected. The best we've ever done There's measles, which is 97 to 98% effective. That would be wonderful if we get there. I don't think we will. I would settle for a 70, 75% effective vaccine, because that would bring you to that level of would be herd immunity level.
Okay, so 70, 75% effective, that's not great, obviously. You want it to be higher than that. But look, as long as we're going to get to herd immunity, that's where you've got, so many people have had the virus that you don't need to worry about it rampaging through the whole country anymore. As long as you do that, I guess that's a good thing. So we're going to get herd immunity, right, Dr. Fauci? Right, Dr. Fauci? Unfortunately, maybe not.
If only, say, 70, 75% of Americans are willing to get the vaccine, and it's only, say, I think you just said 70, 75% effective, is that going to get us to herd immunity?
Unlikely. And that's one of the reasons why we have to make sure we engage the community as we're doing now, to get community people to help us, for people to understand that we are doing everything we can to show that it's safe and that it's effective. And it's for the good of them as individuals and in society to take the vaccine. So we have a lot of work to do because, as you well know, we've spoken about this intensively in the past, there is a general anti-science, anti-authority, anti-vaccine feeling among some people in this country, an alarmingly large percentage of people, relatively speaking.
I can't imagine why. Can you imagine why there'd be some distrust and skepticism of our public health officials? So what he's saying is that 75% effective, and 70-75% of people are going to get it. And if that's all that happens, we won't get herd immunity, which means we may not get a vaccine. Even if we do get a vaccine, it won't give us herd immunity. That means the only thing we can do is flatten the curve to avoid overwhelming the hospital system, which we already did. We've done everything we can. And yet, for some reason, we're all locking down again.
Check this stupid thing out he just said. We know that when you do it properly, you bring down those cases. We have done it. We have done it in New York. New York got hit worse than any place in the world. And they did it correctly by doing the things that you're talking about. Why does Bill Gates sound just like Trump? When Trump says something about injecting cleaner and UV lighting into a person's body, Gates can say something just as outrageous in that nature, and we'll just smile and wave. He even sides with the most brutal totalitarian regime in the world.
There's a lot of trials out in various countries. The list of things being tried is very long. The one I'd have to say I'm the most optimistic about is taking antibodies and manufacturing those, finding the best antibody that a human
notice
made.
That Bill Gates speaks exactly like Trump, but because he's a nerd, he'll give him more respect. There are a lot of things. Let me just say exactly what he just said about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things that we could do, and we're looking into more things. The one that's most promising is the antibodies, and we're looking at the best antibodies. Just because he has glasses and hasn't been laid in half a century, we're supposed to respect his opinion more.
Before I go down that rabbit hole, I want to bring up the original issue, which will lead to the respect for what's right and wrong. Now, I'm going to lay out an intriguing mindset. This is a mindset I strongly condemn, and I believe has no place in our society. Pretend we're in the 1970s and abortion is now an option for a pregnant couple. Go ahead and disregard the whole is it murder, does the baby have a right to live, yada yada yada. Just disregard that. Pretend we're in the 1970s and abortion is now an option for a pregnant couple. If the man doesn't want kids, but the woman wants to keep the child, and the child has no right to live until that child is born out of the body, why does the man have to stay if at that point the woman is forcing him to have kids or pay child support? What sense does it make to force fathers to have children while giving mothers a free pass? Shouldn't the father have equal rights? One can say that the woman has the right to do whatever she wants to her own body, and that we're not just talking about the baby's body. This is, well, that's perfectly fine with the man. The man is perfectly fine with the woman having a right to choose whatever she wants to do with her own body. But why does he have to stay or pay the child support? From this evil mindset, he doesn't. He can leave whenever he wants and shouldn't have to pay child support. This is perfectly reasonable. Reasonable, but evil. This explains why men ended up leaving pregnant mothers to rot. This started back in the 70s and would eventually trickle its way down to today. As a consequence, we have children that grew up without a father figure in their lives. These children grew up without fathers starting every year since the 70s, which means we have roughly up to 32 school years of children that have grown up without a respect for family, authority, one another, and for what is right and wrong. These children are not just living amongst us as ordinary citizens, but they are your grocery clerks. They are your boss or supervisor. They are your fast food rep. They are your school teachers, your college professors, the rich CEO on top, the stockbrokers on Wall Street, the news anchors on television, the night show comedy hosts that aren't even funny. They are your movie stars, producers, directors, critics, and artists. They play in your music bands and perform in your favorite music videos. They're your YouTube stars you so desperately try to be. They are your doctors, your nurses, your medics, your pharmacists, your techs. They're the EMT professionals, the firefighters, the police, your military members from the private all the way up to the general. In some cases, they're even your pastors. They are first-generation immigrants that travel from other countries to the United States, who hold different customs and come from different atmospheres. They're the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. Now, they are our politicians. Fast forward to 2004. It was deemed unconstitutional to display the 10 Commandments in public school. The commandments that say, don't worship any other gods but God himself, don't commit evil acts in the name of God, respect the Sabbath day, honor your father and mother, don't murder, commit adultery, theft, perjury, and feel self-entitled to another person's belongings. This was 16 years ago. The children, which were in elementary and middle school at that time, are now in freshman college years to my age. The exact same children that grew up without the fathers that abandoned them, who not only have no sense of right and wrong and could care less, but who were also not properly taught and trained what is right and wrong. I hope we're beginning to see a pattern here.
Overnight, more rage and destructions in cities across the West. On Sunday, angry mobs ignoring mandatory curfews, violently clashing with police, overturning cars, torching buildings, and looting stores. I can't breathe. In the shadow of Santa Monica's iconic pier and 3rd Street Promenade, the mayhem unfolded for hours as some peacefully protested.
Heads up, heads up, heads up.
Others provoked a confrontation.
Police here are now pushing forward. They're moving all of these protesters back because the situation here is unraveling.
From dawn to dusk, the scene spiraling out of control as both sides clashed and tension rose.
some areas, the looting didn't last long. Here on the promenade, local police and the sheriff's department moved in and made several arrests. That's not okay!
In Portland, Oregon, officers took down protesters on the sidewalk. In Seattle, more looting and even more troubling scenes caught on camera at the hands of police.
And it's for a kid that killed my daughter.
Watch out! Hey, 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 hey! Hey, 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 hey!
You will let us through. Come! Those kids killed my daughter, so get away.
This is not okay!
They killed my daughter. Get away.
I said no justice! No
NYPD released shocking surveillance video of a shooting in Brownsville, Brooklyn that killed a man and injured a woman. You can see the suspect walk up to a man last night on New Lots Avenue, pull out a gun, and start firing as people scatter. The gunman then turned and walked away. This happened last night on New Lots Avenue. A 20-year-old man fatally shot in the head. A 36-year-old woman is recovering from gunshots to her arm and torso. So far, no arrests. Violent morning in New York City. From midnight to 9 a.m., there were 21 shootings with 37 victims. 4 of them died. And in the Bronx, a bullet crashed through the windshield of a marked NYPD vehicle with 2 officers inside. Luckily, neither officer was hit. But what's unclear tonight, were those officers the target? And who did it? Eyewitness News reporter Lucy Yang is in Mott Haven with the very latest. Lucy?
Well, Joe, July 4th celebrations take on a deadly toll as shootings and stabbings mar the celebration for many. We're live outside the Mott Haven section of the Bronx, where, as you said, 2 officers are lucky to be alive. And the question tonight, were they targeted? It was just before midnight going into Sunday morning. The loud pop was not from leftover fireworks. Authorities report a bullet went right through the front windshield of this marked police cruiser parked in front of the precinct. Thankfully, the 2 officers inside were not struck, but we're told the shattered glass did cut one of the officers right above his eye. Tonight, outrage among top brass. Chief of Department Terrence Monahan tweeting, quote, "Despite these dangers, officers are out there on behalf of every New Yorker. They're all owed a debt of gratitude." 8 o'clock Sunday morning, 2 passengers were stabbed as they rode the number 7 train. Both are expected to survive. This video from Citizens app. In Harlem, on West 131st Street by Lenox Avenue, half a dozen were shot. It is hard to keep up with the uptick in violent crimes. Officials now confirm that in the first 9 hours today, more than 36 people have been shot. 4 of them have died.
The embattled mayor of Portland tear-gassed by federal agents. Inside Edition cameras were there as Mayor Ted Wheeler was caught in a cloud of gas. His only protection, a pair of goggles and a face mask. The mayor was heckled as he pushed through the crowd outside the federal courthouse in what was meant to be a show of solidarity with protesters.
You're just as bad as them! You're just as bad as them, Ted! Just stay there driving and shot at somebody.
my God. Oh my God. That FedEx truck. Oh my fucking God. Fuck. Oh my fucking God. They still dragging them. What the fuck? Oh my fucking God.
You know, I'm actually quite infuriated at these rioters and insurrectionists, not necessarily because they're causing violence, but that they're acting as if nothing should have happened to them. And then they get the backing of our government. You would think that with all the violence and disturbance that they're causing, that they would expect an equal and opposite reaction. Nope, not these people. We're getting attacked by vehicles and gun owners. We need to call the police, regardless of the fact that they're trying to abolish the police. Even the family members of the protester in Seattle, who unfortunately lost her life from vehicular manslaughter, are still promoting the cause of defunding the police. On second thought, I'm actually not that upset at the rioters and looters. It actually reminds me of a book that I read in the 10th grade, as well as in the Marine Corps. I read it in the Marines because it was amongst one of the Commandant's professional reading lists. It's called All Quiet on the Western Front. For the longest time, I never understood this self-destructive mindset until I remembered this book. The setting takes place in Germany, World War I. The overall premise of this book is, quote, neither an accusation nor a confession, and at least of all, an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try to simply tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped the shells, were destroyed by the war. Overall, this book describes how men were both destroyed physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually from the war they fought in. How does this relate to rioters or Antifa? It relates to them because a radicalizing ideology is destroying our very own children as we speak. I'll read you an excerpt just to give you an idea of what we're potentially dealing with. Hopefully it will shine a light on the mindset on Antifa and other anarchists that are destroying our country. Before reading this part of the book, I'm going to summarize the build-up to this particular passage. It starts off with the main character, Paul Baumer, describing the poor conditions he is enduring along with some of his friends who are serving in the German army fighting World War I. Long story short, they're starving and crave the kind of food you would eat if you're desperate. They practically abandon all etiquette in exchange to gain even the smallest amount of comfort. Then Paul had to visit his friend Kemrick, who unfortunately sustains a gunshot wound, which leads to his leg being amputated. One of Paul's other friends pulls out a letter saying, Kenturek sends you all his best wishes. The men laugh, with one of them saying, I wish he was here. As in, he wishes he was here on the battlefield going through their hell. Now, who's Kenturek? Turns out, Kenturek was their college professor, pressuring them to fight Germany's war. Here is the excerpt. During drill time, Kenturek gave us long lectures until the whole of our class went under his shepherding to the district commandant and volunteered. I can see him now, as he used to glare at us through his spectacles and say in a moving voice, Won't you join up, comrades? These teachers always carry their feelings ready in their waistcoat pockets and trot them out by the hour. But we didn't think of that then. There was indeed one of us who hesitated and did not want to fall into line. That was Joseph Bem, a plump, homely fellow. But he did allow himself to be persuaded, otherwise he would have been ostracized. and perhaps more of us thought as he did, but no one could very well stand out because at that time, even one's parents were ready with the word coward. No one had the vaguest idea what we were in for. The wisest were just the poor and simple people. They knew the war to be a misfortune, whereas those who were better off and should have been able to see more clearly what the consequences would be were beside themselves with joy. Kaczynski said that was the result of their upbringing. It made them stupid, and what Katz said he had thought about. Strange to say, Bem was one of the first to fall. He got hit in the eye during an attack, and we left him lying for dead. We couldn't bring him with us, because he had come back helter-skelter. In the afternoon, suddenly we heard him call, and saw him crawling about in no man's land. He had only been knocked unconscious. Because he could not see and was mad with pain, he failed to keep under cover, and so was shot down before anyone could go and fetch him. Naturally, we couldn't blame Kenterick for this. Where would the world be if one brought every man to book? There were thousands of Kentericks, all of whom were convinced that they were acting for the best in a way that cost them nothing. And that is why they let us down so badly. For us lads of 18, they ought to have been mediators and guides to the world of maturity, the world of work, of duty, of culture, of progress, to the future. We often made fun of them and played jokes on them, but in our hearts we trusted them. The idea of authority, which they represented, was associated in our minds with a greater insight and a more humane wisdom. But the first death we saw shattered this belief. We had to recognize that our generation was more to be trusted than theirs. They surpassed us only in phrases and cleverness. The first bombardment showed us our mistake, and under it, the world as they had taught it to us broke in pieces. While they continued to write and talk, we saw the wounded and dying. While they taught that duty to one's country is the greatest thing, we already knew that death throes are stronger. But for all that we were no mutineers, no deserters, no cowards, they were very free with all these expressions. We loved our country as much as they. We went courageously into every action, but also we disgruntled the false from true. We had suddenly learned to see, and we saw that there was nothing of their world left. We were all at once terribly alone, and alone we must see it through. I'm just going to point out some similarities between Antifa and these unfortunate soldiers. One, they're influenced by their college professors. Two, if anyone disagrees with their college professors, they are immediately ostracized, or in this case, labeled a racist, bigot, xenophobic, the whole slur. Three, their parents even support this push today, as I've mentioned earlier with the unfortunate death of the Seattle protester. 4, like the boys in this book who didn't know what they were getting themselves into, a lot of these Antifa students that look forward to violence and anarchy actually come from rich families. And 5, both groups despise the generation that raised them. After reading the first 3 chapters of this book, it gave me a whole different perspective of these people that want to destroy our country, at least from the reasoning mindset, not the ideological one. Ideologically, I know they're scumbags. Looking at the way they reason with their issues, though, I can't help but think to myself, how could anyone do this to their own children and think that they are in the right. As a parent, I'm not even sure if I can call you insane. I think you're evil to not only let your children go into harm's way, but to actively push them in that direction. If I were a revolutionary leader, I would be distressed over your reasoning with a reactionary force. I would be thinking to myself, if only I were your college professor, I would teach you how to properly conduct a revolution. I would also be thinking to myself, why do we have to do the dirty work while the college professors get to sit in the classrooms and then lecture us about how we need to rise up and fight the man, almost as if I'm being used? I think I'm beginning to see why these radicals prefer Bernie Sanders over Joe Biden, even with Joe Biden trying to pander to the radicals. The reason being is because Bernie Sanders actually has a track record of being out there in the face of the authorities and being arrested in the name of communism. Bernie is not just another politician. He's actually done it. He's walked the walk. This is why Bernie Sanders got so much support in the Democratic primaries. Bernie is Kaczynski. Kaczynski, their platoon sergeant. And Joe is Kantorek, the college professor. The consequence of what we're about to face is for sure going to be the death and destruction for everyone involved. It's not just the Republicans, the Democrats, conservatives, liberals, Christians, Muslims, or Jews. Even people among the extreme left are going to experience this. This country is going to divide itself, and everyone is going to suffer for it. The book is called All Quiet on the Western Front. It is a good read, and I recommend everyone to read this book. I will provide a link to the book PDF down below in the description box. So, how are we going to bring the country together? On the liberal side, I don't think it's going to be enough to simply protest peaceably the injustices committed. On the conservative side, I don't think it's going to be enough to simply stand up against the tyranny of the mob. For libertarians, I don't think it's going to be enough to vote gold and blast Joe memes on the internet. While protesting peaceably, engaging in polite debate, preparing for economic turmoil, and heavily arming yourself to prepare for societal collapse later this year are all good things. I'm not saying you shouldn't do this. At the very root of this issue, this is all about religion. Regardless what you may believe, there can be no mistake that this is all about religion. As I've mentioned earlier, we've taken prayer and the Bible out of our schools back in the 60s. In the 70s, we passed a bill that took a heavy toll on the family unit, which would improperly raise children up to this day. And then in 2004 to 2005, we took away the 10 Commandments from our schools. As a consequence, we're constantly eating at each other. John Adams had an interesting way of putting it. This was an excerpt from his address to the officers of the 1st Brigade, 3rd Division of the Militia of Massachusetts. While our country remains untainted with the principles and manners which are now producing desolation in so many parts of the world, while she continues sincere and incapable of insidious and impious policy, we shall have the strongest reason to rejoice in the local destination assigned us by Providence. But should the people of America once become capable of that deep simulation towards one another and towards foreign nations, which assumes the language of justice and moderation, while it is practicing iniquity and extravagance, and displays in the most captivating manner the charming pictures of candor, frankness, and sincerity, while it is rioting in rapine and insolence, this country will be the most miserable habitation in the world, because we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, and revenge or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Reading this now, it's quite haunting. In order for us to restore our social fabric, we need to return to the Bible for the influence, the guidance, and the structure that our founding fathers were able to retain, which successfully kept them unified against the British tyrannical rule to the point of successfully coordinating offensive and defensive operations, as well as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations. In regards to keeping our social fabric, I would actually go a bit further than John Adams. We need to constantly be on guard against any form of force on this earth that tries to infringe the teachings of this creator in our society. You know, this isn't solely the non-believer's fault. This actually falls on those who supposedly belong to the faith, believe it or not. When prayer was taken out of school, we basically stood by and let it happen. Martin Luther King, unfortunately, was one of the believers that stood by and let it happen, along with John F. Kennedy. The stance was that we need to accept the rulings of the Supreme Court even though we may not agree with them, or that we can't force Christianity down upon others. There are two problems we get from this reasoning, however. A, we've raised our children to believe that our rights don't come from a divine creator, but they come from a piece of paper or from the government. B, when you impose the teachings that we shouldn't teach religious principles under the establishment cause pretense, you end up undercutting your own narrative by teaching secularism as the replacement, which ends up violating the establishment clause anyway. We as fellow believers have become complacent in our walk with the Lord Jesus. You know, I don't think I finished that parable from earlier regarding the 3 men with a bag of gold, 2 investing and growing their wealth while the other just hid his bag of gold. What exactly happened to him again? Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. "Master," he said, "I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting when you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So, take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags, for whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even when they have, will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of the teeth." Ladies and gentlemen, this is the result of complacency, and it looks like we are about to reap what we have sown. We've gotten too comfortable with this life, just settling with the status quo. We were provided a chance to cultivate, grow, and invest our country on the fundamental principles, which means to hold absolute moral law as opposed to relative morals, and to get to know our fellow neighbors, participating in our communities, as opposed to looking after number one. In the last video, I posted my thoughts on Dana Coverstone's dream. Based off the description of his dream, my friend's dream, and my familiarity with terrorist attacks, I predicted a terrorist attack on the Trump administration on September 11th of 2020. Well, about roughly a week ago, he provided the description of his dream.
I had a dream Friday night. I've had several dreams I put on Facebook, and there are men in this room that I told that dream to that I had back in December. When I had the second one a couple weeks ago, I told the guys that Tuesday night about it as well, the continuation of the dream. Friday night, July 10th, I had a dream that followed the pattern of dreams that I had in 2020. I want you to listen to this. I want you to hear and feel my heart with it. I'm not trying to sensationalize this. I purposely decided to do it, say it this morning, both to my church and not do anything on Facebook with it. But I found that posting dreams on Facebook has interesting consequences. Notes from the Lord. Friday night, July 10th, I had a dream that followed the pattern of the dreams I'd had with 2020. I saw a calendar turn to the month of September. And I saw a hand reach up and pull the month of September off of the calendar. Then that month of September was just floating out in the air, and I saw it land and sit right in front of the altar in our secret place. I saw the horns that are on the altar in there. I saw the picture of the return of Jesus and the healing, the four cardinal doctrines of the symbols. I saw them on the wall, and I saw the cross we have. So I knew I was in the secret place with the month of September on the floor. I was then instructed to stand on the mount and pray for the church to have a strong backbone, for corruption to be exposed, and for a great harvest in the coming months. And so I walked, and I actually walked and stood on the calendar, which was underneath my feet, standing in the month of September 2020. After I prayed for several minutes, I was instructed to get help as I was not enough. So I began to speak into the air, begging believers to come and pray with me for the month of September. Pray for the church to have a strong backbone. Pray for corruption to be exposed, and pray for a great harvest. And suddenly, the calendar below my feet was getting bigger exponentially. If you've ever been to Europe, in some of the plazas and courtyards of some cities, they have life-size chess pieces. It was like the calendar was getting that big, and I was on a life-size September calendar. If that makes sense. And I then saw that I was not alone. I was standing on Tuesday morning, September the 1st. And after I woke up, the first thing I did was look at my phone to find out what day September the 1st was on. It's a Tuesday. But I'm not the only one on the calendar. I'm standing on September 1st, and people on 2nd and 3rd and 4th. Every one of those days is filled with people that are standing on the month of September, and they're praying for the church. There were some praying in tongues, there were some praying out loud, there were some praying very quietly, there were some that were kneeling, there were some laying prostrate. Every model of prayer you can imagine, but these people were praying along with me. And then the cry went out again that more people were needed to pray. So everyone, including myself, began to say, "We need help. Come and pray with us. Come and pray with us." And everyone on the mat, on the calendar that was praying, asking people to come and to pray through the entire month of September. Every day, from the first to the last day, we're asking people to come and pray with us. Pray with us for the church, for corruption to be exposed, and for a great harvest. And more people began to show up on the calendar. And then I saw a hand, as if I was lifted up, and I looked down, and I saw a hand, or finger, and it began to write the words, "A Solemn," in front of September, and the word "Assembly" after September. So all spelled out, it said, "A Solemn September Assembly." And a very, very clear call to pray during that month. The numbers of the people kept growing and growing and growing, and now I realize that the contours of the calendar are actually beginning to fit into the contours of the United States of America. So as I'm standing on September the 1st, I'm up in the Washington and Oregon State area. So just imagine the calendar is actually in the shape of the United States of America. So I knew that specifically this was for the American church in our country. The people kept growing and they kept filling the gaps. There was a lot of white space on this calendar, but I'm seeing more and more people filling the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd. I've got people side by side with me. There's hundreds of people on September 1st that were praying. Hundreds of people on September 2nd, and they're praying. But the more we prayed, the more aggressively we prayed, I saw storm clouds that appeared all over the country. And I saw fires that were outside of the contours, and I saw fires within the country. I saw both the fires of revival and I saw the fires of opposition because of how hard we were praying. And yet the clarion call kept going out, pray, church, pray. Pray, church, pray. Pray, church, pray. And I saw incredible warfare in the heavens. It was impacting those on the ground. There was weariness in the saints that were fighting in prayer. Believers were holding each other up, standing together without any division. There was black and white, men and women. Everybody was fighting together in prayer on their knees or standing or just yelling it out. There was no distinction and no division among the body of Christ in this dream. The heavens were alive with battle. The sounds of battle. I saw angels, I saw demons, I saw warfare. But I saw believers in battle that was severe and intense and brutal. There were wounds and there was exhaustion. People who would stand for a while and go to their knees and pray and then stand back up. But I saw the bruises on arms and hands and shoulders. I saw weariness in the battle. And the heavens were alive with the same type of battle going on. And in the dream it seemed like it lasted forever. Finally the battle was over. And my eyes were drawn to the very last days of September. And I want you to understand one thing, this is not a date-setting dream. As I looked at that count, I saw people who were broken, who had been beaten down, they were wounded, but they were standing victoriously. And I saw the heavens open. And I saw the Lord stand with his angels. And he said very clearly, arise my bride, and prepare to pray. Arise my bride, and prepare for battle. And then lastly, arise my bride, and prepare to see my face. For I'm coming soon, and my reward is with me. And then it was like the sound of 1,000 shofars blowing all at once. And in the dream I could feel the wind of it hit my face. And I woke up so peaceful. I woke up with just the peace of Christ in the heart of my spirit. And what I sense is that the Lord is calling the American church to pray during the month of September. He said, arise my bride, and prepare to pray. Not arise and pray, he said, arise and prepare to pray. In other words, we've got to pick up our prayer lives. I don't know what's coming in September. I know the significance of the one dream I had, but what I saw was intense spiritual warfare unlike anything I had ever seen or anything we've ever experienced as a nation before. I don't know what's coming, but I can tell you this, the battle he is preparing us for and calling us to pray for is going to be serious and difficult. And we should expect serious spiritual conflict today in that month. So the closer we get to the September, the body of Christ needs to be getting ready to fight spiritually like never before. And I'm not declaring that October 1st the rapture is going to happen. Nowhere did Jesus say, I'm coming on this day. He just said, I'm coming. The same thing he said in Revelation, the same thing Paul said, the same thing the disciples said, the same thing the Word of God tells us. Keith, if you could just come back to the keyboard for just a moment. We're going to have to learn to tarry again, church. We're going to have to learn to be on our knees and stay on our knees. Why? Because he's trying to warn the church that something is coming. Something difficult is coming. Something big is coming. And we're not ready for it. I can say we as a church are not ready for what's coming. But I can tell you this. There are thousands and thousands of people that have contacted me and said, your dream struck a nerve, because I have felt the same way. I'm hearing about churches that are starting prayer meetings. I'm hearing about national things being started. Why? Because other people have the same sense of feeling in their hearts, their minds, their spirit that something is wrong and that something big is coming. Linda, I've heard you say for several months now, something big is coming. You don't say it out of fear. You say it as a warning that in your spirit the Lord is saying something's coming, and when something is coming, you prepare. If the weather guy says, okay folks, there's conditions right now on the ground that's possible for a tornado to be hitting, so be watching. Right? The Lord's telling us now the conditions are there for the tornado to hit. But come September, He's going to say, folks, it's on the ground right now in your area. What are you going to do? Head for shelter? Run for cover? I'm calling this church. People can do with this what they want out there. But I'm calling this church to start praying to get us ready for what's going to happen in September. I don't know what it is. And I'm sure that many people say, well, October 1st, Pastor, if nothing's happened, you're going to apologize. You bet I would. You bet I would. If I had my way, I'd never have another dream again. Because the stress, I've lost 16 pounds. I'm on the second hole on my belt to keep my pants up. I pushed it myself. I've got more expectations on my life than I can handle right now. More people want my time than I can handle right now. But I got to be obedient to what God said. I got to be obedient to what He said. I'm calling this church, I'm calling Living Room Ministries to our knees, to the altar, to get ready for whatever's coming, because something big is coming. And when it hits, you're going to be glad you prayed. You're going to be glad that you were the bride that rose up. He called us bride. He didn't say church, He said, arise, my bride. We know who He comes back for, right? His bride. So folks, would you just come and find the place at the altar? Would you kneel down at your seat? Would you begin to pray for this nation, specifically for revival, for the backbone of the church to be strengthened, for corruption to be revealed, and for a great harvest? Even now, come. Every Sunday that I'm here for the next several months, we're going to be praying at the altar, asking God to move. We've been calling some special prayer times and special meetings. I'm asking some national leaders in the prayer movement to, I sent the video to Cindy Jakes to share her my heart. Because I can't do something on a national level. But I can do something here. I can do something right here in Brooksville. So God.
I think it's interesting that he mentions that there is prayer for corruption to be exposed. Speaking of corruption, while we were focusing on the pandemic, the rioting and looting, do you recall that scandal Hillary Clinton had with her private email account sending and receiving classified information? This past March, she is now required to provide a deposition, an open deposition, to the Department of Justice regarding her use of the private email address. She has to provide this open deposition in an open hearing. Judge orders Hillary Clinton deposition in email flap. A federal judge has ordered former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to sit for a sworn deposition for the first time in connection with her use of a private email account during her State Department tenure. U.S. District Court Royce Labyrinth issued the order Monday in connection with a 5.5-year-old Freedom of Information Act lawsuit the conservative group Judicial Watch filed seeking emails related to the deadly 2012 attack on U.S. facilities in Benghazi, Libya. Clinton was previously required to submit a sworn written statement about her email use, but the deposition, if it takes place, would be the first time she had to submit to live questioning under oath on the subject. During her 4 years in President Barack Obama's cabinet, Clinton relied on a private email account and server for both her work-related and personal messages. The practice led to a storm of controversy that roiled her 2016 presidential bid and is widely viewed as contributing to her ultimate defeat by Donald Trump. In response to press questions during the campaign and in the sworn statement, Clinton said she kept the private account and server after taking over as Secretary of State in 2009 as a matter of convenience and not to avoid FOIA or other disclosure requirements. The FBI investigated, interviewed Clinton, and recommended against criminal charges, but it did find dozens of messages in her account that officials said contained highly classified information. However, Labyrinth said in his ruling Monday that the FBI probe and representations by the State Department have not adequately put to rest questions about the episode, and Clinton's deposition is needed to address those concerns. To argue that the court now has enough information to determine whether State conducted an adequate search is preposterous, wrote Labyrinth, who has tangled with Clinton aides for decades in a series of cases. The judge and appointee of President Ronald Reagan said the fact that more Clinton emails continue to dribble out from the State Department raises questions about the thoroughness of the government's earlier actions to recover Clinton's messages. Even years after the FBI investigation, the slow trickle of new emails has yet to be explained, Labyrinth wrote. He blasted Clinton's prior answers given in response to another judge's order as, quote, incomplete, unhelpful, or cursory at best. Among the questions Labyrinth said Clinton still needs to answer, how did she arrive at her belief that her private server emails would be preserved by normal State Department processes for email retention? Who told her that, if anyone, and when? Did she realize State was giving no records response to FOIA requests for her emails? If so, did she suspect that she had any obligation to disclose the existence of her private server to those at State handling the FOIA requests? And why did she think that using a private server to conduct State Department business was permissible under the law in the first place? In addition to ordering Clinton's deposition, Labyrinth said he'll require Clinton's former Chief of Staff Cheryl Mills to be deposed, although she was already questioned in person and under oath by Judicial Watch about the issue in another FOIA case. The judge also approved a subpoena to Google for any Clinton emails it may possess. Labyrinth said Clinton and Mills may be questioned specifically about their knowledge of records related to the Benghazi attack, but not about their response to the assault, which killed 4 Americans, including U.S. Ambassador to Libya. Lawyers for Clinton and Mills did not immediately respond to requests for comment on the judge's order. And regarding the open deposition, according to CNN, Comey prepared to draft exoneration for Clinton before conducting interviews with top Clinton aides who were offered immunity for their cooperation. Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley and Senator Lindsey Graham said Thursday in a joint statement, citing transcripts of interviews with former Comey aides obtained by the Senate Judiciary Committee. Conclusion first, fact-gathering second. That's no way to run an investigation. The FBI should be held to a higher standard than that, especially in a matter of such great public interest and controversy. Grassley and Graham wrote in a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray seeking more information, including all drafts of Comey's final statement on Clinton's emails by September 13th. If you watched my previous video on the prediction on what would happen on the month of September, you will find that I predicted a terrorist attack on the Trump administration that would incapacitate Trump and Pence, and then place Nancy Pelosi as acting president of the United States. Is it a coincidence that I predicted this to happen around the time of the due date for the sworn deposition? The news about Hillary's appeal getting rejected broke right around the time the markets were crashing in response to the COVID-19 panic. As mentioned in The Dream, Dana Coverstone said that something big was going to happen. He just didn't know what it was. I have a hunch. I'm not 100% certain, but It's a hunch that the possible terrorist attack on the Trump administration is going to be used to distract the American people from the public sworn deposition that could have otherwise implicated corrupt politicians from different parties in some pretty heinous acts, to say the least. This is honestly the best way to describe it. No, I can't even say to say the least. It really is the best way to describe it. My vocabulary is incapable of going that far in describing how horrendous these acts might be. Before I go into what we, the American people, should do to be on guard against this, in case I'm right about the terrorist attack, I'm going to record this clip of me providing a full prediction of the attack, so I can play it on September 11th if the attack occurs. This is only if the attack occurs. I predicted the terrorist attack on the Trump administration. I predicted that it would take place on September of this year. I did this by examining the dreams of Dana Coverstone and a friend of mine who is in no way related to Dana Coverstone. Pastor Coverstone dreamt that certain events were to take place in the following months: March, June, September, and then November. These events would spark nationwide civil discourse and lawlessness. I shot for the 11th of September to be specific. In my friend's dream, he dreamt that there would be big explosions that would kill people, and amidst the election, a woman would be given authority and go mad with power. I predicted the 11th because it is a date notorious for Islamic terrorist attacks, since Antifa and the Black Lives Matter organization are funded by Iran and other Islamic extremist groups, and that Al-Qaeda is exploiting the death of George Floyd to recruit people to their cause to overthrow the United States. I figured that an attack on the anniversary of 9/11 would offer the perfect distraction for conservatives, liberals, and libertarians to tear each other apart for. Conservatives would have the proof that Islamic terrorist groups are working with Antifa and the Black Lives Matter organization to destroy America. Liberals would accuse conservatives of lumping in peaceful protesters and peaceful Muslims with the rioters, looters, and terrorists. And libertarians would continue to blast Joe Jurgensen memes on social media. This, therefore, has everyone distracted from the elephant in the room, which is the sworn deposition required of Hillary Clinton regarding the use of her private email address to send and receive classified information. Now, what is on those emails that everyone is so obsessed about? That's a good question. Most of the information is classified. We do know, however, that the Clintons have popped up numerous times on Jeffrey Epstein's flight log. Jeffrey Epstein was a prolific child sex trafficker for high prolific philanthropists, wealthy individuals, celebrities, and politicians. He would then save this evidence and use it to blackmail these individuals into handing him money. Last year, however, from July to August, he was apprehended by law enforcement for engaging in these activities. He was due to testify as to who was involved with the activities on Pedophile Island. Before he was going to testify, after he was taken off a suicide watch and the guards fell asleep along with the cameras malfunctioning, he ended up not killing himself. No need to worry, his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, was arrested at the beginning of July. My only concern is whether or not if she is going to stay alive. You see, now these days, not killing yourself has become quite a challenge. But there is a stark contrast between not killing yourself and not killing yourself. I also recommended that no matter what happens in September, that we continue to pray for the church and pray for the nation during the month of September. Not only will this terrorist attack be used to distract us from public corruption, it will also be used by Satan to distract us from the Lord by attacking one another, even within the body of Christ. This is a perfect tool for him, because there is no way whatsoever that an assassination on the executive leadership is ever going to be apolitical. Any assassination on any elected official is always political. It's just not going to, there's no way we're going to avoid political debate about it. Now, that being said, if you want to mourn for lost leadership, that's fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't. No matter your beliefs, though, don't let anything distract you. Whatever time you could have used to focus on this event, use it to focus on Christ. If you're a conservative, don't let the devil win by severing your prayer with the Lord, because either a liberal is goading you on, or you're afraid of this country and you're afraid that it's going to be torn apart. At this point, we need to pray to the Lord. If you're a liberal and a conservative goads you into trying to lash out, don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. Don't give him the time. Don't give him the time nor the day or the place. Satan is using him as a tool to get to you the same way he can use anyone. Libertarians, if you don't believe in a God, I highly recommend you pray to one. Set the memes aside and pray. Pray for the church. Pray for the nation. Pray for corruption to be exposed. If someone tries to provoke you on social media, just remember, hashtag pray for the church, hashtag pray for the nation, hashtag pray for corruption to be exposed. Keep doing this, because we desperately need it. All of us need to stand and pray together as one nation under God. You'll certainly find me doing this all month. Don't even try to provoke me. It won't work. I'll get back with you on October 1st, but right now it is August 2nd, 2020. A lot of us haven't gotten in touch with our communities, which is another one of the big factors of keeping us united. It's probably why those that favor big government policies are so supportive of social distancing, keeping everyone away from each other, so that way the government can have us believe whatever they want us to believe. Sure, they can track our background by assigning us social security numbers, register property, homes, and firearms, but keeping us apart from each other strengthens them. It restricts the flow of ideas and information over time, as well as resources to eventually make us dependent on an establishment machine. It also takes a further toll on the family unit. According to the chief of the Texas Division of Emergency Management, Nim Kidd, in an interview for News for San Antonio, proposed that we still need people to wear the mask out in public. We still need people to keep social distance and isolation. The one thing I want to try to get across today is that we need to do that when we're in our homes also. If you don't believe me, I'll even post a link to the article in the description box below. This was aired not too long after Texas's relapse into mandatory mask wearing. The mask mandate will more than likely lead to another lockdown. When it does, then they'll push for measures to be conducted in your own home. If you don't adhere to these measures at home, they will seize your children if you have any, and then impose fees on you in your household. If you think I'm crazy, the governor of Texas is already threatening the possibility of a second lockdown. We as a people don't need to necessarily unite against our government, but rather we should be against our government by uniting with each other. Keeping us apart is what the government wants, regardless of political ideals. We give the government what it wants because we worship it rather than the Creator who guarantees these rights to every man on earth. There's always the social contract idea, which is that people get together to surrender some of their freedoms in exchange for other freedoms, such as we submit ourselves to a set of rules or a binding constitution in order to gain other freedoms because they are protected by the government. The belief in the Creator, however, negates that notion. We as human beings are endowed by Him with these certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Government doesn't provide these rights. It protects them as its moral obligated duty to the Creator. A violation of those God-given rights warrants the removal of that official if the issue cannot be reprimanded. Uniting with each other in this fashion is a key asset to ensuring our freedom from tyranny, all forms of terrorism, and foreign invasions, just like it did against the British. It wasn't just the right to keep and bear arms that guaranteed this freedom. The Second Amendment doesn't just say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Verbatim, the Second Amendment states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. According to the Second Amendment, not only is the right to keep and bear arms necessary for a free, healthy social fabric, but a well-knit community where we get along with our neighbors and form a militia together that is not only well-trained, but disciplined and restrained to combat with ease the corruption in government, insurrections, and foreign invasions. This can be accomplished in many ways. I recommend talking to your fellow neighbors, getting to know them, as well as taking time out of your day to study some of the documents found in the National Archives. Have discussion about these. Conservatives, liberals, and libertarians need to get back in touch with one another and unite together as Americans, because your freedoms at this point are under attack by those in power, by those taking to the streets to destroy all property and assault with deadly force innocent bystanders, and by foreign adversaries who are patiently waiting to invade our homeland to destroy your way of life. One of the things all of us should certainly be united around is the case of the murdered soldier at Fort Hood. We'll get into that and why no one is talking about this. We'll also get into the details surrounding Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian candidate, because I always have a soft spot for libertarians. And more than likely, we're going to be going down numerous rabbit holes in the process. We've got the situation at Fort Hood. We've got the potential cover-up murder of George Floyd. We have the potential abortion scandal that may take place, as I've brought up earlier. I think Pizzagate. We're going to talk about Pizzagate and Wayfair and how they might actually be involved with the activity of Jeffrey Epstein and possibly the abortion scandal. Unfortunately, it'll have to be in the next video because this video took quite a bit to record and I had to push this one out immediately. This is Matthew 24 Answers, signing off saying Breonna Taylor was obviously murdered.